Hi everybody. Welcome to another Artist Beyond the Studio. I'm sure Niamh will give you a bit more of an in-depth look into her history, but I'll just give you an idea of her experience and achievements. I obviously couldn't cover them all in such short a time. She studied printmaking at NCAD and graduated with first class honours in 2002. In 2004, she became a member of Graphic Studio Dublin. And in 2007, she had her first solo exhibition in the Printmakers Gallery on Drury Street in Dublin. She's indicated that this exhibition opened up her career path to other exhibitions, residencies, and awards. And for example, she then went on to be invited to exhibit a piece in the Irish Cultural Centre in Paris that year and in the Chester Beatty Library for Artist Proof. She went on to organise numerous residencies, exhibitions, and set up a printmaking business with me in 2012, teaching printmaking. The residencies, I sense, have had a direct effect on her work over the years. And so I'm looking forward to hearing more about that and the work she made on the back of them. She's worked on various commissions also, most notably Behaviour and Attitudes Commission, which is significant, I think, in terms of edition size, not only, but also historically in the studio and the Irish art world. So we might hear a bit more about that. She exhibits in Graphic Studio Gallery, So Fine Art Editions, the RHA, Law Society, in galleries in Oslo, Slovenia, Edinburgh, Poland. And also she works as a master printer and projects manager at Graphic Studio Dublin. She mainly works in etching, but the past few years have also seen collage running alongside her printmaking practice. And recently, she's also added a watercolor woodblock Japanese printing style called Mokuhanga. We see many multiples in Niamh's work, a set of boats floating in the sky, a set of dwellings in a swirl of cloud. Elements that point to me, ideas of location and rootedness. But conversely, as she says herself, these elements are juxtaposed to a nod towards freedom and flux. I'm hoping to hear about Niamh's residencies over the years and her ideas surrounding place, her development of her imagery, in particular her themes and motifs that we see run throughout her work. I'd like to hear about her relatively new interest in making collage and Mokuhanga prints and how that fits into her practice. And hopefully she'll share some technical secrets with us too. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce Niamh Flanagan, my good friend and colleague, to start off the Artist Beyond talk for her. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much, Claire. That was very beautiful. I hope I can do your introduction justice. So thanks very much to everyone for coming today. I really appreciate it. It feels kind of like, I'd say maybe how a dentist might feel when he goes to the dentist's today, to be on this side of the table. But I'm enjoying it thoroughly. So I'm going to start sharing my screen here. Nearly forgot. So I guess I'm going to start. To give my work a bit of context, I'd like to start right at the beginning. So I think it's kind of helpful in terms of my whole work practice. So this is work that I made for my degree show in NCAD back in 2002. I guess at the time I was working in like a lot of different media, photography, installation, screen print, light boxes. So I was looking at artists like Christian Boltanski, Gabriel Orozco. Orozco is like a Mexican artist who was, what I loved about his work was these beautiful, simple kind of interventions within nature. I guess for me, there was an interest there in the magic and all around us, and in the ephemeral, those kind of moments that are all around us that sometimes we don't have time to stop and see. I wanted to create the other thing I think that was important to me while I was in college was that I wanted to create an installation that was immersive and that could be appreciated by anyone, by someone who didn't necessarily have a background in art or art history. So I wrote a semi-autobiographical fiction piece, which was, the more she looked, the more the objects started to speak to her. So it was like this story about walking through my city, the city that I love, and these objects started calling out to me. So I think the kind of anthropomorphism of it began to creep in there, like these objects had a voice and that they were talking to me. And it's definitely something that has been with me ever since in my work. I just love this idea that things have personalities and can speak to me. I don't know what that says about me. This was a sculpture piece in the show, and it was really interesting making a cast. I cast this trophy that I found and made a load of resin ones and some plaster ones, and I guess it was it's quite similar to how you make an etching. You know, you put all this labor into making this mold, and then all of a sudden you can produce a multiple and have an army of something. So that for me was really interesting. After college was hard. You know, I went to Donegal. I did a residency there. I continued to work in text pieces and photography, but also when I was up there, I was in a studio called CULTUREL in Gweedore in Donegal. And while I was there, they had a fantastic etching studio, and I began to figure out etching. And I was instantly hooked by the way you could layer colors up. Just the possibilities of it, how deeply you could etch a line. I guess really it wasn't until I got to graphic studio when I learned what you could really do with print, because, you know, NCAD taught me a little bit, Cloakerdlin taught me a little bit, but when I was immersed in graphic studio from 2004, I was surrounded by people who'd been making fantastic prints for years, and they were so supportive and helpful. And it really made my work, it made me view my work in a different way, and it definitely gave me so many possibilities. In 2004, then I was in the studio, and Dermot O'Connor in the Printmakers Gallery, which was on Drury Street, offered me very kindly, took a punt on me and offered me a solo show. I asked, agreed to give me a solo show. And Dwellings of Mind and Space was the show that came out of this. And I guess 2004, 2005 and 2006 in Dublin was a crazy time. You know, it was very strange. Property was on everybody's mind. I mean, the bank was telling me to buy a house. People were coming up to me going, yeah, why haven't you bought a house yet? You need to get on the ladder. I don't think I would have been able to afford a bicycle, let alone a house. And I guess I felt slightly on the outside looking in, you know. I mean, this print here kind of exemplifies the Celtic tiger for me, waiting at a bus stop in the rain. So I began to work on these houses, and they definitely became a part of my visual lexicon. You know, they to me they seem like they've become like characters in my work. They're sort of ever present, and they seem to speak to me, for me. You know, shelter, I guess, dwellings, they're so fundamental to us. We need them to survive, you know, and they conjure up these ideas of safety, space, security. But also then on the flip side, you can associate them with confinement, captivity, rootedness, isolation. And I guess it's such a huge part of our history, and you know, land ownership and property are tied up with our cultural and historical identity. So all that was really important to me. Also, I guess I was really enjoying exploring printmaking and making color prints. The other thing that I was trying to push etching, I guess, in a way. So if you can see the difference between the two plates, this basically I etched the little houses out of a copper plate. So I etched the plate so deeply that these, you know, point at them, these little houses here were like 2D sculptures. So they became, I guess, free from the confines of the copper plate, and they became these little things on their own. So they were kind of free to move around then and to feature in different prints. So I really liked that idea, you know, so I was kind of playing around with the theme through the process. The same with this one. These three sets of houses came from a different print of mine called Deserted Village. But I kind of explored, you know, I could try them in different colors, different locations, different backdrops, which kind of really excited me. So I guess etching, I was totally hooked on etching by this stage. It was, I knew I had etchitis. In 2009, I was really honored to be invited to take part in Ile d'Hiver, the Winter Island, at the Centre Culturel Paris. It was just such an honor to be representing Graphic Studio Dublin and alongside some really amazing artists. And it was brilliant to have some time drawing. But basically, the theme of the project was to draw from the collections at the National Museums of Ireland. So I had a great time. Spent a lot of time researching it. This one here is based on a ceremonial trackway or road made from oak, which was found in the bog, perfectly preserved. I guess it made me think of all the history that resides under our feet, and the things that get found and the things that don't get found and will never get found, and the stories that get built up around that. And I guess how random and chance it is such a big part of history, and the stories that we tell. There was a couple of objects that really spoke to me in the collection. This one here is called St. Patrick's Bells and Snaking Motorway. So St. Patrick's Bell is from the 8th or 9th century, and it really struck me as it kind of juxtaposed very strongly with the ornate bell shrine which accompanies it, which was later made to cover it. The shrine is dazzling, it's bronze plates with beasts and snakes and jewels all over it. And the bell, I just loved the bell. It was so beautiful in its solid clunkiness. It's a big lump of iron that was dipped in bronze. Interestingly, the bell and the shrine have been were kept in the same family until the 18th or 19th century. They were buried in an oak box at the bottom of a field. But apparently there were loads of bells. St. Patrick would give a bell to a disciple once he opened a church. And I just loved the idea that there could be many more of them lying underground. At the time when I was making these prints, the motorway near Tara was nearly built, and there was amid huge arguments of progress versus preservation. Progress won, as it often does, but I just thought I thought I'd give these bells a chance to make a vain last stand at Tara. The broider boat is definitely, I think, one of my absolute favorite items in the collection at the museum. It represents so many things for me, art, beauty, transcendence, magic, ritual, mystery. And it speaks to me a lot of our island nation, those who've left our shores or those who've gone before us. A lot of the research I was doing at the time was into the Fifth Province and the Field Day Theatre Company and our complicated history with language and words. And it's kind of something that has stayed with me a lot in my work and my practice. I think a lot about it, our collective past and how it affects our language and our thought processes. I guess I imagined these perfect little boats. I made a fleet of them. There is only one, but I made a fleet of them. Maybe an offering to some sea god. I just kind of liked to imagine the idea of them taking flight and sailing into the sky. A fog of dreams. This is I just picked this one out because it's quite typical of a lot of the work I was making at the time, and it was made to describe an inner world, I guess, and feelings of quietness and solitude. For me, there's something really quiet and calming about this piece. It's like a journey into another world, but I guess one that is quite impossible. I mean, there's no windows or doors on the houses. So they're quite inaccessible, and they're disconnected or unconnected to one another. And for me, it suggests this almost womb-like other world. There's like a silence to it where these things don't matter so much anymore. And I guess, you could look at it the other way. I kind of like the duality of that. I mean, you could equally say this is terrifying. In 2012, I had a 2-person show with Paul Furneaux. He is a Scottish artist who makes Japanese woodblock prints, and I'd done a residency at Edinburgh Printmakers. The show combined photographs and prints with a text work, which I wrote to accompany the prints. The text was printed onto vinyl and stuck on the wall of the gallery, which was interspersed with the artworks, creating a journey for the viewer through the city or several cities. To my great shame, I do not have any installation shots of this work. So if this talk has taught me anything, it is that I need to be a better archivist. However, I do have the text piece, which has survived my poor archiving, and I'm gonna read it to you now. So enjoy. She was not happy where she was, but would she be happy where she wasn't? She had to find someplace else, to escape to faraway hills, to see around the next corner. But was there something better on the other side? There were strange worlds all around her. Everything seemed altered and unreal, and yet the same moon winked down at her from knowing skies. She waded through puddles and darkness, through the glitter and doom of a downturned city. There must be a rainbow here somewhere. A pot of gold? This place was like no other. Islands rose up from cloudy horizons. Paper boats chased along the water. Everything seemed to have somewhere to go. Fields yielded strange crops that floated away. Unsaid words hung heavy in the air, then moved silently on. Under her feet, the earth was shifting. She had been here before. Fragments of the forgotten, unnoticed and unseen. They all passed her by. Skies changed overhead, the storms of tomorrow approaching fast. The cold loneliness of exile crept over her. Ghosts called out from under the ground, from a world that was gone now. Invisible cities surrounded her, telling their truths and fictions. Their stories shouted at her from all sides. The island broke beneath her. Her coffee was cold. The rain had passed. Maybe she could stay here a while. Her world was more than enough. It buzzed around inside her head. It was time to move on. Again, this was a kind of a semi-autobiographical fiction, making reference to the making of the work and the ideas that were going on for me at the time. I guess the piece was based on a short reverie or daydream. The country was a mess at the time. Friends were leaving, losing jobs. People had nothing to do. We had a half-built, badly built country, and I was upset. Lots of people were upset, and I guess I was highlighting that. And what do? You keep going, you keep carrying on, and I guess even though sometimes it can seem kind of ludicrous or silly to be making art, like I don't believe that, but sometimes I feel that. But you just keep going. We just kept going. I should talk here a little bit about Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino, an Italian writer. It's been a huge influence and inspiration for my work. It's based on conversations between Marco Polo and Kubla Khan. And Marco Polo is telling Kubla Khan of all the places that he's traveled to within the kingdom. Obviously, he makes up all of these places. So it's like an imaginative fiction. Each piece is like a snapshot of a different description of a different city. And at the end of the day, Calvino was writing about Venice all the time. So it was the same city, but each one has a different name and a different perspective, I guess. So for me, it just contains such beautiful ideas that resonate with my work. Ideas of memory, travel, exploration, reflections, happiness, sadness, loss, the real, the imagined, and everything in between. So this print here, The City Cried to Dream Again, I guess was a bit of an ode to Dublin for me. Grimy, rainy, depressed. The city was glum. Although artists had more space, the kind of pressure was off. It was like the pressure valve of the craziness of the Celtic Tiger. There was a kind of a release in that, I think. But anyway, there was magic underfoot in the city if you looked. Like Invisible Cities Rainbow. This is actually based on the Halfpenny Bridge, one of my favorite spots in Dublin. It's quite a liminal space. For me, it was like the portal to the south side as a north sider. So this is the way I would have gone since I was a teenager, going from north to south. The deeply bitten lines here for me provide a metaphor for the passing of time. A copper plate goes into a strong bath of acid and the acid kind of ravages it. These marks and traces, whether we want them or not, they're there, they exist, they happen. And this, I love this because it speaks to me of things beyond our control, the things that we can't change, and the random, and the chance, the beautiful. It's for these reasons that rain and clouds and rainbows, storms are often welcome recurrences in my work. Dark lies the island, the words hung heavy all around. I've been working on islands a bit. mostly coming out of my residencies down in Kilreely with Claire. And it was beginning to emerge as a theme that I was really interested in exploring. The darkness in this print is aiming to capture something of that feeling as night begins to fall. If you're lucky enough to be looking out across the Atlantic, I guess I'm thinking of Clew Bay, that kind of area of the world. And I guess what I love about it is that idea, when you look at something like that, I think you get this feeling of smallness, maybe a feeling of connectedness, but also that the world is so much bigger than you and your problems seem to be less significant maybe than you thought. I had to throw in a cactus, guys, because like I love the cactuses. This is the first print that I ever made of a cactus. I have a strong affinity with them. There's such a poetry to the cactus. I chanced upon this one in the Botanic Gardens for the Natural Selection exhibition, and it was in bloom, and it was just so spectacular. I don't know whether cacti get lonely, but for me, they seem the perfect ambassadors for loneliness with their prickly dustiness. They're really good subject matter for me. They tie in with a lot of the themes that I like to explore in my work. They're outlandish, they're otherworldly, and they really do seem to have a lot of personality, which kind of weaves itself into my world of animate inanimates. From Islands to Other Seas was an exhibition that I had in 2016 alongside Claire Henderson and Yoko Aquino. So I was really pleased to be exhibiting beside these two amazing printmakers, and we all had been exploring work about islands since a residency in 2011. Myself and Claire had been coming up with all these great ideas. I mean, we had an idea to do a book, Claire. Where did that go? Anyway, there's still time. I guess I'm interested in islands and how they can represent an ideal world, a perfect place. With their limited accessibility, islands seem the perfect spot for a utopia. Equally, through their geographic isolation, they can work the other way. They can be prisons or exiles. Looking out at an island draws your attention to this distance. It is like looking at another world. Because of this, for me, they seem to be the ideal prism through which to explore ideas of escape and sanctuary, exile. In each piece for this exhibition, I kind of wanted to push the dreamlike quality of the prints. Each vista looks upon an island, and the viewer is on the shore. But I guess I was kind of questioning, which is more stable? Are we more stable where we are, or in Niamh's crazy printed world? Fish Scale Island and Lemon Rock is the name of this print. It's kind of an improbable meditation on what a fish might imagine of an island to be, and the skies above it. I guess I'm both fascinated and terrified by the thoughts of deep, dark water. They kind of, we know so little about them and what lurks beneath. It kind of reminds me of our unconscious. Island community. So my houses here look like they're having a lovely old time on the island. But there's not a lot of space, is there? Everyone's kind of up in each other's business. The dark water surrounding them is not very inviting. What kind of community is this? How do I get off this island? At the time of making this print, I was new to motherhood and determined to carve out a space to make art in my new universe. And I reckon some of that emotion and maybe claustrophobia slipped out into this print, and maybe a lot of the prints from this time. It was hard to say if we were falling down or climbing up. So this is a kind of a sequel to the island community print. It's a different island, but maybe at a later stage in the process. I guess the difficulties of living on an island are known to us all here in Ireland. We've seen millions of people leave our shores, unable to make a life here. For me, it's kind of important. I like the way that the island is, it draws you in. It looks a little bit like a kind of a cake or something sweet. I don't know. Spots on the island But then if you look at it in another way, like they're falling from the clouds, these spots. I mean, but maybe it's not a cake. Maybe it's a disease on the island. I think it's one of my saddest prints, because even if they are climbing up, all those houses are not going to make it. Collage. This was the first exhibition where collage came into the frame. I guess when you're a printmaker, you have lots of proofs, and you might print something to test it for color. The print might not work, or you might totally mess up the registration on a print. So you end up amassing this kind of stockpile of imperfect prints. And I guess for me, it was, they kind of bothered me, you know, like there was things that were really nice about them, and it seemed such a shame to, what do you do with them? You know, you don't sell them, you don't put them in a gallery, you keep them in a drawer, and then you can't keep everything in the drawer, you know. So I guess what I really enjoyed when I started kind of figuring out making the collages was the freedom that was afforded to me. So I didn't have to worry about making an edition. I could make whatever I wanted. I could, so working in monotype and collage is just so free compared to making an etching. This is Printed Worlds 3, and it takes one of Italo Calvino's cities, Trude, as its starting point, which is a city that looks the exact same as the one that you've left, and the same as the one that you're going to go to. So I guess it's kind of exploring notions of homogeneity. And I wanted to kind of push the idea of the multiple. So I've just printed this island again and again. So it's kind of like a recurring dream or nightmare. They were all 3D as well. Again, harking back to my terrible archiving, they were in these little boxes, like a box frame. They were about 10 centimeters deep. I don't have photos of that. They're gone. I'm in Egypt. Inside Worlds. So this show came quite hot on the heels of that last show. So it was kind of nice to have something back to back like that, because I think sometimes when you finish an exhibition, you've got a kind of a slump, and you lose momentum. But if when you have something else to go to, I think a lot of that work, a lot of that, all the stuff that all that energy, I guess, that you have, gets harnessed. So these collages here provided me with a new direction for the work. And I guess, yeah, like I said, if you're unencumbered by editioning and etching, you can make these one-offs. And I guess the collages enabled me to bring my characters into new flights of fancy. So I don't know if you recognize these houses, but they're the guys from Island Community. So they've been released from the tyranny of Island Community and are reimagined diving into a pool from a great height. Overlooking the lake. Again, I was really interested in playing around with scale and finding interesting juxtapositions. It's nice when you're working with collage, you can try things that work or don't work much more easily. And poor fish here is in a rather small pool of water, and those houses must be very far away, or maybe that fish is absolutely gigantic. Torn skies and paper palace. I guess with this work, I wanted to reference the materiality of the work. I love paper. I love works on paper. And I guess collage in a way is a slight celebration of that. So here you've got like lots of combinations. You've got plain paper, torn paper, cut paper, and then proofs at different stages. So there's, just a simple line proof, a ball ground plate, and then fully etched color etchings, and just plain paper. So yeah, I mean, I guess for me, it's sometimes like something like this, like just the plain line plate can so often just end up going in the bin. And there's always, I think there's something nice when you print a plate on its own, even if it's just an aquatint or a bit of a lake. But if you print it on its own, it's beautiful in its own right. So this here, Other Journeys 3 Floating Worlds. So I presume you can recognize the temple from the last piece that I showed you there. So that's the finished print. This is a series that was shown as part of Inside Worlds as well. I was commissioned to make these 4 prints based on someone else's travel memories. I love the idea of creating a work based on the imaginings of some place that I may or may not have been. It kind of reminds me of Judith Shalensky's Atlas of Islands I've Never Visited and Never Will, which is a really beautiful book if you haven't acquainted yourselves with it. Memory, I guess, is such a funny thing. It's so tied up with imagination and narrative. I just loved the idea that this woman was going to have a series of prints by Niamh Flanagan on her wall of her holiday memories through my filter. You know, the stories we tell ourselves become our memories, I guess. And like, are we actually reliable narrators? Definitely not if we're not the same person. Stories from Another Shore. In this piece, I wanted to depict a group of houses on stilts. So it was the first time that I put these houses on stilts. That they've been kind of coming up in my work for the last few years. This was from 2018, I think. I guess I like the impossibility and inaccessibility of these houses, and the stilts, I guess they serve as legs as well. So, you know, I like to think of them kind of wading around one stilt at a time through the water. I love fairy tales, and definitely Baba Yaga, the bony-legged witch of Russian folklore, was a definite reference point here, as well maybe as some of Louise Bourgeois' sculptures, which have always blown my mind. So as Claire said, I was commissioned in 2019 to make a series of prints for Behaviour and Attitudes. I took the theme of shelter for the project. I was so honoured to be part of it. Such an illustrious project that has been running in the studio for 32 years now. So I wanted to make work that was, you know, I guess typical of my work. And shelter seemed like the perfect starting point for it. So this is Shelter 1, The Disappearing Island, and it takes its title from a Seamus Heaney poem, one that has kind of rattled around in my head for years. It's based on the voyage of St. Brendan and the legend that on their journey they landed on what turned out to be a whale. I'm so drawn to Heaney's amazing imagery and the lovely little shift at the end of the poem where he seems to be saying that this unstable landing spot held firm when we embraced it. I love this idea that of shaky ground and things that we cannot mitigate for. Things won't always stay the same, you know, but that's okay. You know, the ground isn't going to be stable, but hold on tight. Shelter 2, Strange Tides and Distant Shores. This features these houses on stilts again. So again, I guess I'm playing with that idea that the shelter might not be as stable as we think. Like, how do we get into those houses and where are they going? I didn't realize at the time just how distant our shores were going to become only a few months later. There's something very portentous about the image, but I love that the cloud up the top is raining flowers, which are forming in a field around the lake. Shelter 3, Under Dark Mountains. Here the houses look much more solid. They don't have legs. They're not going to run away. So that's good. But they're in the shelter of these looming, hulking mountains. And I guess the path separating them to me suggests maybe isolation and unease. I guess for me, the mountains are a benign force, a shelter for these two lonely houses. But I guess there's kind of an ambiguity there, which I really like. The Lost Villages. So as I was making this piece, I think it was 2019 or 20, I was contacted by Orla Lahan from Fighting Words to take part in a project that they were working on with women human rights defenders around the world. And she wanted me to put a piece in to accompany a text by a woman called Lara Ramadan, a human rights defender from Palestine. Lana had written this account of going back to see the villages that had been destroyed and left behind by her grandparents when they were forced to flee. I'd pretty much made the drawing for the piece by the time I received Orla's call, and I was quite astonished with the resonance between my image and her text. She spoke of little houses hidden from the road, cactus plants, now a symbol of destroyed villages as they grew up all around these abandoned villages. She speaks as well of gardening and the small things that people do in these situations to find hope. She speaks of preserving the memories of her family, fighting for change, to make a difference. I was really honored to be part of the project. The book is called Yes, We Also Drink Coffee, and it's printed by Fighting Words. I just loved the synergy between the text and the artwork. This here is Winter at the Lake. I guess mountains have always featured in my work, but I took a trip to the Alps in 2016, and it really brought them back to the forefront of my mind. It was my first trip back to the Alps since I was a kid or a teenager. And I'd left Frankie, my then 7-month-old baby, at home to have a few days with some friends in France and Italy. I guess what I love about mountains is that they give you a sense of perspective. And for me at that time, again, you know, I think I needed a sense of perspective. Like motherhood is hard, and mountains for me, they just provide this sense of calm. That they're so huge that really they make any of your problems seem to pale. You know, you realize how tiny you are. It's definitely something I've really missed since lockdown. You know, big mountains in my 5K. I do have the sea, so I'm not gonna gripe. But I am looking forward to seeing a mountain again soon. So these guys are the 3 houses from Stories from Another Shore. I printed them on Japanese paper and then shinkolayed them into this beautiful winter resort with a pretty terrifying dark lake. Expedition. So this print I made last year for Diamond Point. I guess I wanted to make a piece that speaks about the Herculean task that is art and art making and print studios. It was GSD's 60th anniversary, and I wanted to acknowledge the arts community that makes up GSD. I find, you know, I like to work on my own, and I find that you think you can work away on your own, but having the support and help of colleagues around you is invaluable, you know, and it makes us all stronger. So I just thought a mountain would be a fitting analogy for art and printmaking, friendships and life, and climbing mountains. I love climbing mountains too, and the sense of satisfaction that you get. You know, I think that's the same as sometimes when you actually figure out a print. I realize I'm rabbiting on and we're running out of time, but I quickly want to talk about the Mokuhanga. In 2019, the wonderful Kate McDonough introduced a group of us in the studio to Mokuhanga printmaking, which is Japanese woodblock printing. You use watercolors, there's no press, and I just loved it. You can build up colors really slowly on the print and on the paper. And what I love, I'm going to say something positive about the pandemic because there's no way I wouldn't have had the time. You know, if you know, once the studio's open and I've got like 10 million projects that need to be done by yesterday, you know, the time to explore a new medium is always, you know, pushed to the bottom of the list. So really it was so nice to be at home but kind of connected to this group and working on figuring out some of the rudimentaries of making a Japanese woodblock print. So Kanreki was an exhibition that was shown at the Model Gallery in Sligo late last year, and it's going to show at Graphic Studio Gallery maybe next month. I guess at this time I was walking most days to see the sea. I live close to Bull Island, and I absolutely love I love walking through the dunes, and you can see nothing but dunes. And even if it's busy, I don't know how I flicked on there. Even if it's busy, you know, you feel like you're on your own. There's so much space there, and once you get to the top of the dunes, you get that view of the sea, and I absolutely love it. So I guess a lot of the Mokuhanga prints that I made were based on the sea and memories of the sea and the mountains. Lots of different holidays. This one here, they're kind of going through a portal. It's the same houses, you know them, Stories from Another Shore. And that is me done. Thank you all. It kind of fell off a cliff there.
That was great, Niamh. It was brilliant to see the whole start to finish kind of, I think. So we've got time for a couple of questions, but since I get to choose, I'm going to ask one first.
Cool. Hit me up.
I was wondering if there was any way you could talk a little bit more about your motivation to use specific motifs. Like I'm thinking specifically about, for me, not the houses, specifically because I think like you talked about those quite a lot, even though I think there's probably more behind there, as there so often is. But I find the swirl really interesting, like the circle that isn't a complete circle. You don't have to talk about that one specifically, but I'm just wondering if there's if you have any more, if you can give us any more about that, about like where that comes from, or where the need is to kind of bring it back and again to maybe kind of tell different stories or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I kind of said at the start, I like this idea of having a visual lexicon. And I think for me, one thing on its own says one thing, but if it's said again and again, or if you've got an army of them or a collection of them, they begin to kind of grow in their strength and they talk to one another. And I think actually that's one of the key things of my work. I think it speaks to itself. And for me, in the making of it, I like those references, that I guess, the circles, a lot of them, like they would have started with dwellings, my show back in 2007, with a print called Fortune's Fickle Wheels, which was based on a Shakespeare quote. But it's, again, it's that idea of Fortune's fickle wheels are the things that are above us that maybe capriciously control what we do. And we think we know what we're doing. We think we've got all these great plans, but, the universe might have different ideas.
Yeah. There's some people saying, complimenting you here, saying how great the talk was and how interesting it is. Would anybody else like to ask a question?
A question about the origins of your art. You mentioned Christian Boltanski and Gabriela Rothko. I was just wondering, how did you come to art? In the sense that, had you seen their exhibitions at the Douglas Hyde or other exhibitions? Were you...
I saw Rothko's exhibitions at the Douglas Hyde. I mean, his kites film is just stunning. Like a lot of that stuff, Christian Boltanski, I've never seen it except in, the library in NCAD was a rich resource for me. Other influences, I guess, would be David Hockney. I love his prints. I love his particularly his fairy tale etchings, the grim fairy tales had a big impact on me. I also really like a lot of illustrators, like Sean Tan, John Classen, Oliver Jeffers. John Classen, for me, like his sense of color and his sort of the minimal nature of his illustrations capture something. There's a humor in them, and then there's also a kind of a profoundness. Like he has this series, we found a hat. I don't know if anyone knows his work, and maybe it's just because I have a 5-year-old, but I knew him before that. It's not just because I have a 5-year-old. But we found a hat, and it's, these stories, they're so simple. They're almost like little mini Beckett plays, and like beautiful layers of kind of cutouts and watercolors.
But had you come to art from somewhere to go to NCAD? I mean, had you always been interested?
Oh, I came straight from school. I was way too young to go to art college. I missed saying that. I found NCAD quite difficult. I came straight out of school. My mum would have been an artist, and I always would have had an interest in art. But I definitely think going to NCAD at 18 was, I would have benefited from coming to art via taking a year out. I took a year out and did the Students' Union, and it definitely cleared my head. Again, it gave me that that perspective that I needed. There's so much going on in NCAD and or in art college, and it's not just, you're not just learning a technique. You're learning to be an artist, and then you're also expected to put on a degree show, but you're still only learning. I find that really, I think it's really hard for artists. I think it's really hard for young artists now with a 3-year degree in NCAD. I don't know how they do it.
Kate, did you
Yeah, I mean, hi Niamh, that was
Hi.
wonderful. Thank you so much, and
Thanks,
for
Kate.
sharing your thoughts on your work. It was very special.
Thank you.
I was going to ask you something about your job at the graphic studio in relation to your own practice and how you organized that. Was it very difficult to do that in the beginning, or how does it work? You know, as a
Uh,
master printer and a full-time job there, where do you find time to do your own work?
Yeah, great question. It's really hard, but I think the way I look at it, like, is that I feel really lucky to have a job that is so creative. I mean, I love that it feeds into my practice, that I get to make amazing prints with these artists. I think right now my time is quite finite. You know, I can take a week off, or I can work at nights or weekends and kind of squeeze it in. But I guess I see it as, when I do have time to make art, it's not like I'm starting again, because for my job I'm also making art with other people. So it definitely keeps my hand in the game. You know, it's that, like, I'm still thinking about making art. I'm still making art. It's just not mine. You know. So yeah, it's you know, like, I mean, because for years I waitressed as well, and that's totally different, because you're coming back into the studio, but you're coming from a different place.
Yeah.
So I think it's really rewarding. You know, I love the challenges of it, and I can definitely, you know, if I'm solving a puzzle for someone on how to make something look like X or Y or Z, that it's definitely something that I can apply to my own work when I get to it. Yeah.
Great. I love your latest Mokuhanga print.
Thanks very
Beautiful.
much. Which
Yeah.
one is the one that I
Vortex.
just Vortex?
Vortex.
Yeah. So that's kind of I was having a lot of fun with them at that stage. I was kind of putting them all together. So I guess I'd amassed a lot of proofs as I was figuring out the Mokuhanga, and it was really nice to kind of combine elements of them with elements of etchings or elements of other wood blocks.
Right.
So it's kind of a collage Mokuhanga.
Hiya. Yeah, that was really interesting, Niamh.
Thanks, Sheila.
I loved the titles on your work. I thought they were really poetic. And I was just wondering, do you work intuitively and then the titles come, or do you start out with an idea?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, it's kind of it's a bit of both. Sometimes, like, I'd have a notebook on the go, and
Right.
if I'm reading or researching, like, and I find a phrase or a word or something that sticks with me, I write it in there, and I kind of have that
Okay.
on the go. And then, like, again, it's why I love, you know, I find it much harder to title one piece if it's all on its own.
Right.
Because I kind of feel like you have, you know, a bit more pressure. Whereas if I have a load of, like, I love to kind of have a day of, you know, messing around, figuring out the titles for prints. And I guess
Oh,
as
yeah, okay.
I work, I just keep going, and I know that the day is going to come where I have to write the title on the bottom of the print. So I'm kind of editing it as I go. I might have a page in the notebook with all the titles, and I'll just keep kind of tweaking at it until I get them right.
Listening to you, I felt you could be a writer too.
If I'd only taken that path, I don't know if it would have been any easier for me though. Yeah.
No, you're very articulate. It was actually, I've seen some prints over the years, but it was really interesting to hear you talk about it.
Yeah,
so thanks very much. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Sheila. How's it going?
I think you did the cover for Kevin Barry's There Are Little Kingdoms.
I did indeed. I did two of them. So they're Little Kingdoms, the first edition, and then they had a second edition. So again, and I love, you know, the title of his collection, There Are Little Kingdoms, just had such resonance, I think, with my work. And I love, I guess I love his writing, but also his explorations of Irish culture, and I guess the history of it, and his ear for language is so beautiful. The two prints, Stinging Fly, have actually been quite good to me. You know, I've had a relationship with Declan Mead for a while. He's the one, himself and Kevin came into the gallery, and they found those prints and decided they'd be good for the book. And I've also done a cover for the Stinging Fly, that Last Splash collage. I don't know if you remember it. I showed it there. That was they did an issue of the Stinging Fly, which is a lovely magazine of new Irish writing. but they did an issue on homelessness about 3 years ago, Christmas time. So I featured on the cover of that as well.
Okay, yeah, because I think there's a book to do, you know, the fact that you're repeating motifs, you know, that could be explored in maybe a graphic novel or a very short animation or something like that.
I definitely, I think you're so right. I definitely know animation, like I get it, but my fear of computers is large. But I definitely would love to work with book. I mean, I've done some books in the past, but I'd love to work with a book or possibly a story at some point. Yeah.
Okay, thanks,
Thanks, Connor.
I was going to ask you, Niamh, if you were
Yeah.
to head off to one of your desert islands, what would you bring with you?
Oh my goodness. Woo, what would I bring with me?
Printmaking maybe wise. I just.
Well, obviously I'd bring a baron and some watercolors and some woodblock tools, and some really good books, and tea. Yeah.
Tea.
Yeah, definitely.
That's the fuel, is it?
Would I bring people? I mean, there's the question, you know, I mean, is that what we're looking for? Am I looking for getting away from people? And I guess that's the thing that's going on in my head all the time as an introvert. It's like, you know, am I trying to escape, get away from people and be on my own? You know, like I think growing up in a small suburban house with 3 siblings and never a room to myself, I definitely think space, you know, it's had this kind of psychological impact on me, you know, that I always need to make sure that I can carve out a little corner for myself. So I'll go to the island, Niamh, big time. Don't need anyone.
Niamh, can I ask you one more question if you don't mind?
Yeah, of course.
The formatting of your prints, unless it's just for, you know, the online, seems to be always square. They're landscapes, but they're not landscape, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Is that a purposeful decision on your part?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they're not. There are some rectangles in there, but I really do favor the square. I think when I start drawing, like the way the way my process works is I will start with a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper, and I draw like loads of different versions of what the print might look like. And they invariably turn to squares. I love the shape, and I love the way it looks with the border around it, like as a print. I think it works really nicely. Sometimes I think when you have a rectangular shape, the border can, I don't know, like I struggle with it sometimes. Whereas the square I really like. I also like the fact that with a square, like if you veer towards the abstract, that a square you can change the orientation of the shape and print different directions, which I really like. As in, you can print a plate and then turn it upside down or flip it around and print it again onto the same piece of paper.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the square, like it kind of excites me as a shape. It's just a natural, it's an intuitive thing, I think, you know. I'm just kind of drawn to it. Okay, well, thanks so much, guys, for coming.
That was brilliant.
Really appreciate it.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Niamh.
Thanks, Niamh. Well done. That was great.